What is up? It's your boy John Shreve, aka Mr. Tell Like It Is. Today, guys, I'm gonna join Eric Janikci on his channel. We're gonna do post by post comparison of Martin Fitzwater and Chris Bumstead. Seeing that they're both competing at the Prog Pro in about 3 weeks' time, I am going to add my 2 cents into his judging comparison. As I am an nationally qualified judge, and I've competed with Chris Bumstead before, and I know both gentlemen, this is gonna be pretty fun to kind of have a little fun and predict where we can see this competition going between the both of them. So if you haven't seen it yet, go to Eric Janikci's channel. Chris Bumstead might finally lose in open bodybuilding. Let's get into it.
If you guys don't know enough about classic versus open, there are different poses that you hit in open that you do not hit in classic physique. So classic physique is front double, then we go right into our side chest, and then we go into back double, and then we've got abs and thighs in favorite classic. They do not hit front lat or back lat spread. They also do not hit a side tricep. So there's a lot of poses that actually Chris is not gonna be hitting that he has to hit, which could be an advantage or disadvantage, probably a disadvantage in the case that he's not as practiced with them.
I'm going to have to 100% disagree with Eric Janikci. I've competed with Chris. He is a bodybuilder to start. He got his pro card as a bodybuilder. So in a lot of poses that Chris does, he does the front lat spread. Now again, when it comes to the pose that they don't have, to make it super simple, the classic physique, they do not have the front and back lat spread, side tricep, and most muscular. That's the only pose that they don't have, but trust me, a guy like Chris Bumstead, who's been competing as long as he has, and he got his pro card as a pro bodybuilder and then switched to classic physique. So he's still got those poses in him that he can do very well, and you've already seen him do the front lat spread. And trust me, the front lat spread is the same as the back lat spread. Just turn around and it might arch a little bit more in the back. So let's keep going.
Let's actually break it down and take it from the top, front double bicep.
Ooh, this is gonna be fun.
Chris is a taller guy, and he's 6'1.5", I believe, and weighs in about 238. So you've got a guy, Martin, who's, I think, about 5'6", 5'7", and just over 230, I believe, 230, 235. So you're only talking about 15 pounds different, but 6-7 inches shorter. So you have to understand how much more muscle is packed on Martin Fitzwater.
People try to make things different when it comes to bodybuilding poses in terms of like your front double bicep. Yes, sometimes you could turn your hips a little bit, but like that is, even for myself, I do a sort of classic physique pose. Again, guys, understand that classic physique poses are just bodybuilding poses. And now they just put classic physique in the front of them. You're great posers from day one, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to great posers like, you know, Lee Labrada, Sean Ray, Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone. They all did this nice looking classic-y type pose. They've only just called it classic physique because they have the division, right? So that little bit of a twist and kind of tilting a little bit is still a pose that bodybuilders do in open class bodybuilding. So it's not gonna make much of a difference in terms of that. What's gonna make a difference when you're on stage is what Eric's talking about, is gonna be the size difference. Now, I know how much Martin weighs. I literally messaged him before the Olympics, like, hey, how much you weigh? And he's like, I'm 238 before the show. So I would say that he probably cut down a bit and he's back up. So he's a little bit over 230. And he's my height. He's more around 5'8" and he's around 5'7". And then Chris, again, yes, he is taller. Chris is around like 240-ish on stage, and Fitzwater's a little smaller. But Martin is shorter, so he's gonna look a lot thicker. Now, when it comes to bodybuilding, the thing that he's not really saying that he might say later in the video, bodybuilding criteria is different than classic physique criteria. So when it comes to muscularity being one of them, when it comes to symmetry, conditioning, those kind of things, there's gonna be a difference of how Chris will be judged. So the biggest disparity will be more so on how full he can look on stage. If he can't get that fullness, he'll get dwarfed by other bodybuilders who might be close to the same height as him and bigger. Let's say Regan Grimes decided to jump in the show, and he's not gonna jump in the show because he had a kid. Regan and him are the same size. We were all in the same lineup together. So when it comes to them standing next together side by side, he's gonna look a lot smaller. The only difference is a little taller. With these two, it might not be as much of a difference. Again, I've competed against guys who were taller who weren't as big either, but still were just really good. So,
and the good thing that Martin has for him is a really good taper. A lot of guys in open, they struggle with having that really, really nice taper, that X frame that Martin actually has in spades, and these really crazy sweeping quads. So Martin's has crazy quad sweeps, probably some of the best in the IFBB. And I think that's going to be a huge differentiator.
When we talk about quad sweeps with the X frame, if you look at this, here's your X frame. Looking at shoulders, see his shoulders, and if you just kind of did around, he could come right to his lats. Great shoulders, great lats. And then you come down to this side and you have this like X frame here. The quads don't just start right here. The quad sweep is like from here all the way down. You know, you're getting everything from here, that rectus femoris all the way down. And obviously Martin has really, really good quads from here. And so does Chris. Chris has great quads as well too. And if you're looking at like, you know, the conditioning department, now again, different lighting, we're taking it from a picture, different lighting, different poses. So you really can't compare this thing accurately at all, but we can have fun doing it. If I'm doing pose for pose on stage and I'm the judge and I look at, you know, conditioning here, conditioning, Chris has them. When it comes to muscularity, Martin has them, right? Because it can be a lot different when you see somebody in person and standing next to each other and not have these two pictures. Because if we had this picture that was scaled, Martin would actually be like, would be at his elbow. Martin's head would be at his elbow and you see a difference. And then because you'd see the difference in how tall he is, you'd see how much bigger that Martin is as well too.
This is one of Martin's worst poses now. So you've got one of Chris's best poses against one of Martin's worst.
Now, when it comes to this pose here, there's a couple things that are happening. Number one, pictures are nowhere near what it's like in person, right? Right now, Martin could be at the beginning of his pose or even at the end of his pose. For a guy like me, when I pose, my fists are always like this because when you round your fist up like this, so your wrist, it actually helps bring out your shoulders more and then pull your entire body up. It makes everything pop a lot more. So he could be at the beginning of his pose. Seeing he's got his trunks, he's got him pulled up, he's kind of coming up. He isn't up yet. So we're not seeing the true representation of what he looks like, but doing this for fun. Now, when it comes to Chris's lat spread is really good. You can see how sharp it is. But for me, the biggest difference I would make with Chris's lat spread, I will make him pull his hands back a little bit more so you can actually see the lats in between. You want to actually see that. He's kind of covering it up because he's so high and you're kind of getting a little bit of his lats being covered by his arms. So right here, we're looking at pose for pose from here, like, you know, front to side. He gets beat in the leg department. You look at the lats here. Again, his lat spread looks a lot more polished. Chris's, Martin could be just getting into it. But if we're looking at pose for pose, I'm gonna have to say it's a very close one here. I'd have to give it to Chris because Chris has his lats fully, you know, popping out. And right here, you know, Martin isn't showing how wide he can actually be. Again, this could just be him getting into his pose. But leg department, he's crushed Chris. Leg department, he has got him. So those things you have to take into consideration when you're doing these things for fun, because just taking his legs alone, if we're putting him at the same height and we're saying his legs are like this, right? He's beating Chris in the leg department, but he's not, he's shorter. So we got this really short, not really short, but like stockier, you know, massively legged, muscular dude sitting here next to him. When they're on stage, Chris will look a lot smaller. Chris next to the other classic physique competitors looks like a beast. He looks like he's out-muscled everybody. You know, he's out-poised everybody. It's obvious. Now this year, he had a little bit of a, you know, he had to really battle with Mike Badass. That's Mike. Mike's actually smaller than Chris. So when it comes to, say, Mike being up next to Martin, Martin would dominate. So when it comes to this entire pose, we could say body parts look pretty good if we just did upper body and lower body. But if we did all of it together, you have to see, okay, who's winning here? Now again, I might have to give this one to Chris just because of how the lat is, how it's spread out. But if he actually put his, you know, actually full-on flex into his lat spread, I would almost have to give it to Martin. But since we're doing this and doing it kind of fair this way, right now, he has this pose.
Chris, one of the better, like probably the best side chest in classic versus Martin here. Oh God, this is so tough.
On the record, if Terrence Ruffin was Mike's height, Terrence Ruffin would be 6-time classic physique Miss Olympia. I'm just saying that. I'm just saying it right now. No disrespect to Chris. Chris probably knows this himself. If Terrence was Chris's height, Terrence would be winning for 20 years straight, but he's not. And this is a tall man's game, unfortunately. But when it comes, I'm just comparing when it comes to the side chest, because the side chest, the best side chest, I believe, in that division is and goes to Terrence Ruffin. He just has the best put together physique. He's the best poser for sure. Unfortunately, he's 5'6" and he can only weigh 180, 90 pounds on stage when Chris can weigh 240. Some disparities there. But when it comes to outside of that, Chris's side chest is awesome. Chris's side chest, now again, where we're judges, we're judging like this. We're going like this. We're going from bottom to top, bottom to top, bottom to top. Feet all the way up, feet all the way up, feet all the way up. Right away when I'm looking at this, conditioning wise, Chris wins conditioning all day long. The difference when it comes to conditioning for men's men's classic physique and open bodybuilding, I know this for a fact because I was a open men's bodybuilder. Conditioning isn't everything in men's open, right? It 100% has weight there for sure, but it's not everything. So if you're like absolutely inside out peeled to the bone, but you don't have the other things like muscularity, symmetry, balance like that, that's gonna play a difference. That's why a guy like Heidi Chopin, the leanest guy on the stage, didn't win, because he has to have everything. It's not just about being conditioned. So in the conditioning department right now, side chest, this right now, dominates Martin. The way they're posing is different. Chris is doing a really good pose where he's sitting here and he's opening his shoulder up and pulling everything back. So when you're looking at from shoulder to shoulder, he's super wide. What Martin is doing is Martin's doing a pose like this, but then he's pushing his arm out to show a little more delt. And that's a couple techniques that a few guys that I've done some posing with have shared it with me. I'm more of a fan of the mix of what Chris is doing and what Martin's doing. If Martin would pull his shoulder back a little bit more and then pop his shoulder like this, he would look a lot wider here. We're looking at muscularity. Like conditioning, we already got Chris all day long. We're looking at size here. He's gonna look wider because of the way he's posing. When it comes to muscularity, Chris has got great conditioning again, like, you know, from bottom to top, but look at the hams on Martin. Look how big his legs are. When you put a guy who's 5'8", 235-ish pounds dry on stage next to someone who's 6 foot, maybe 6'1", 240 on stage, it doesn't matter. Martin will dwarf him in size because you're looking at, you know, the difference in size. If you're stretched out and you only weigh 245, you look smaller. So yeah, next to them side by side, it looks pretty good. It looks kind of even here, but in person, when you're actually in the right scale, when you're scaling these guys right, Martin is going to dominate him in terms of like size. Now, the way Chris is posing this perfectly. So for me, just doing this for fun, I have to give this to Chris. I have to. It's not fair. Again, we're looking at the Olympia this year and Martin's show from the New York Pro, right? So the better would have been if he had his shots from the Olympia.
From top to bottom, I just think that because he has that just fuller look, more density, it's a hard pose for me to give to Chris, even though I think it's one of his best. It's just, he's taller, it's more aesthetic, it's prettier to look at, but like from a bodybuilding, and that's what it is, it's just open bodybuilding, Martin takes this pose for me.
Eric's kind of, you know, judging this based on what I said, some if, which is fine, that's what he's doing, but for me to do this kind of thing fair, I'm just going from shot to shot. Now, if I did if, I'd be like, well, I'd still give it to Chris, because conditioning is gonna be one of the deciding factors if he can bring in some good fullness and size to compare to the other big guys on stage. Most pro bodybuilders who are open class bodybuilders who are Chris's height are not 240 pounds. So let's go get the tall guys. Regan Grimes, Antoine Vaillant, Crizzo, Andrew Jacked, Samson Dauda. Just those 5 guys alone are almost 6 foot or 6 foot, and they're around 250, 260 on stage. So you gotta look at, you know, Chris being up there next to these guys, he will look like a classic physique competitor next to open class bodybuilders. The big thing for Chris will be is if he can go in there with some added size. Now, if you guys thinking about it, he's not gonna put on muscle. He's not gonna put on a lick of muscle between the show 3 weeks at all, right? He's not. He's gonna put on some size in terms of fullness because he'll be eating more food, he'll have more carbs in him, more glycogen stores will be fuller, he'll look bigger and fuller on stage. That's what that's what the goal, or I think the plan should be when he's on stage.
I don't think either of them hit a true side tricep in their posing routine. Triceps and biceps are not Chris's strong suit. And so if I'm gonna give the side chest to Martin, I'm gonna have to give the side tricep to Martin as well, just because he's got more density. His triceps, his arms are spectacular.
I'd have to agree as well too when it comes down to side tricep. When it comes down to it, if you look at Martin, his structure, side tricep is basically the same as the side chest, only they're doing the tricep instead. And his leg will probably pose similar. So you're gonna see the big quads, the big hamstrings, and then you'll have the big old, you know, shoulder with a nice tricep there, where Chris will be a little bit more, his arms aren't the best, so he will be very vulnerable in that position. So I have to agree with Eric on that pose for sure. So for me, back last Friday, looking at this pose, so we can say, oh yeah, conditioning is great and all, but when I look at the entire pose here, and this is a good pose to look at from this standpoint in terms of like conditioning, again, understand this, Martin looked way better actually at the Olympia, and we're judging the Olympia pictures from Chris Bumstead, arguably his best look ever, to Martin's you know, New York Pro, which is a great look for him, but the Olympia, he's a top 4 Olympian. So those pictures would have a lot better. From the sheer size, and you can see from the ground up, from the calves. If you look at how much quad is coming, this is his hammies, right? And his hammies from the back are peeled. You can see the ropes. Then glutes, massive, peeled to the bone. And then you got this. This is all quad, guys. All this is quad. This is all quad. Look how much quad Chris has coming out. Look how much quad he has coming out. Let's move to the back, okay? Look at the traps. Look how much muscle we have here. Yes, Chris has got some great, you know, size in terms of like, you know, his shape and whatnot. And he's, you know, he's conditioned. But again, look how much more muscle we have in this pose. Look how big his traps are going into his lats. Look how big his, you know, look at his rear delts. Look at his delts from the back. They're huge. He's a big dude. This pose here, Chris is beat.
But Martin, just from like just a density perspective, he's got one of those like crazy, like Phil Heath-esque backs where it's got that dense 3D look that kind of just bubbly and jumps out of the screen at you.
So we're talking about density. There's no real scientific thing about like muscles being dense. That's like it's actually just a thing. Like it's a saying more so than it is a scientific fact or some kind of biomechanical term. It's not. Muscles aren't dense. You don't have dense muscle, right? The term dense comes from just like looking at like, you know, if you're looking at something that was like just packed, right? It's just full. There's just a bunch of muscle there, right? That's what people are saying when they say dense. Let's look at just his traps. Look how much muscle is in his traps compared to Chris's traps. Martin looks like he has more pounds of traps on top of traps on top of traps, where Chris has great traps. Look at his lats. Like you see, like here's his teres right here. Let's look at his lats, right? Lats here. Look at Chris's lats. They're not. There's not much there. So in terms of density, we're talking about like just slabs of muscle piled on top of muscle, piled on top of muscle. He's killing him here. Absolutely killing him.
Back lat spread, for me, this is a pose that Chris can win. Just because of the same argument I made for the front lat spread. He's got so much width, he takes up so much space on stage. He's got great flow, great X frame.
Completely disagree. Now, they're not, like, again, we're only getting these poses based on, you know, screenshots, so we don't know if Chris is fully in his pose, and we don't know the same thing when it comes to Martin. Now, Martin's posing his a little different. He's not arching as back as much as Chris. Chris is arguably not posing this is back as good as he needs to. For me, conditioning, size, right now, Martin absolutely dominates Chris in this pose, right? Chris is doing a lot of, like, right in this pose here, he's arching too much in his back and is taking away from the actual shadow cast. That's what you can see. It's way darker in his pictures, when most of his pictures you've seen have been pretty light. And that's a mistake a lot of people make when they do in the back lat spread, is they arch too much and they lose that shadow that the lights are kind of shining on you, right? So when it comes to muscularity, again, you know, Chris's traps are shallow and sitting low, where if you look at Martin's traps, they start at his ears and they're just bubbling out all the way down, and then he's getting that, see how much width he has here, right? And then again, we're going from the ground up. Same pose as the back double bicep. Only thing different is they're just posing the top half different. Same legs, wins. Upper body, wins. That for me is a pose for Martin, 100%. So right now, Martin has Chris in a lot of these poses, right? And if we're gonna say predict that they're both gonna be at their absolute best, and size-wise, again, it's gonna have to be Chris coming in with some added size and fullness to really stand up next to these guys. Because again, if you got a guy like Martin, and if you get some other guys in there that are like, you know, 5'10", 5'11", and 270, 260, which there are a lot of guys who are, it's gonna be hard for Chris to actually, you know, could be compared with those guys in terms of like size-wise, right? He's gonna get dwarfed next to the guys who are a lot bigger. Chris will look like the rest of the other bodybuilders in classic next to the guys in open, right? Not a knock against Chris, a different class, a different division.
I think Chris has mastered this pose. He's got great abs, small waist, he can pull the vacuum, not to say that Martin can't, but Martin, he doesn't have the prettiest ab structure, and it's not because he doesn't train him well, it's not because he's bloated, it's just because just genetically, he's a shorter guy, shorter frame, and he doesn't have that beautiful structure to his abs.
I have to 100% disagree. Martin's not going down the classic physique. Chris is coming up from classic physique to open class bodybuilding. When you're doing your ab and thigh, doing a vacuum isn't a good thing. You don't want to do a vacuum ab and thigh. You want to flex your abs like Martin's doing. And I have to argue and say that he's completely wrong about this because, yeah, he might have a tiny bit of a gap here. Look at the shape of his abs and how cut they are and how deep the cuts are and his obliques. This is showing a lot more conditioning in this pose. This is a better pose for him. And then again, you're getting the width of his lats. Like, we're not just judging, you know, just the abs and thigh. When we say ab and thigh, those are pose, that's just how you pose. When we're actually judging it, we're judging from the feet all the way up. I'm going from here and then my eyes are traveling to here and I'm like, okay, look at his legs, look at his X frame again, look at his quads from the front, look how big it is from the front, look how conditioned it is from the front. Then I'm going in here, right after his trunks, his stomach's flat, no bubble gut, his abs are in, you can see how deep those cuts are, and then his obliques. This area here I'm focusing on a lot. And then moving up, look how much the X frame continues in this pose. He's way bigger wide to wide. He's way bigger width-wise and X-frame compared to Chris. This is a pose in bodybuilding for Martin, not Chris. I have to completely disagree with that, unfortunately. You know, your most muscular, this is gonna be a hard pose for Chris to win against any of these guys. Because the most muscular is a pose that you have to be, you know, you're just showing all the muscle that you have. Martin's pose in this is arguably a very classic-y type of pose. He's got his hand on hip, the hand on hip, he's twisting his hip a little bit. We're exposed, we're seeing how much better his abs are in this position. Again, Chris is completely peeled, absolutely peeled. But you can see how much more muscle Martin has on his frame, right? From all the way from the bottom to the top. Chris's frame looks great from here, but the most muscular pose, he's gonna get out muscled here.
Chris is going to just get out muscled. It's literally a most muscular. Martin, pound for pound, height by weight is just like so much more muscle than Chris. It's just, I think it's going to be overwhelming in that pose. Plus he practices it all the time. It's one of the most important open bodybuilding poses. So I think that Martin's gonna get him there. I think this is gonna be just a very stark contrast. But if the biggest thing I think would have helped Chris if he was going up against somebody that was very minimally aesthetic.
Now I gotta, you know, I agree with them in terms of like who I would have to win. I have Martin winning for sure, but we also don't know who else is showing up for the show. I haven't looked up yet, and I'll kind of look into that and see who else is showing up. But there's some other guys out there that are really good bodybuilders. Martin just one of them. He's a top 5 Mr. Olympia, right? Going against the 6-time Classic Physique champion. It's still 2 different games. It's a different game. Open bodybuilding is a lot differently judged than class physique. So when Chris goes up to open class bodybuilding, they're not going to make consideration and say, oh, because you're, you know, class physique, we're gonna, no, they're gonna judge it the same way. So when it comes down to it, yeah, I 100% agree that Martin is a better open class bodybuilder than Chris is, for sure. Just like we can say that Chris is a way better class physique competitor than Martin is. If Martin went down the class physique, he get dummied because he doesn't have a class physique body. Again, this is Chris's choice to go up there and challenge these guys, but it's gonna be really fun to see what happens in terms of like who else shows up and how Chris fits in with the rest of that lineup. See some guys get in there that are, you know, close to that 6-foot range, that 6-foot height, and with that kind of muscle, and see how Chris actually stacks up. Of course, let me know in the comment section below if you want me to do more videos like this. And guys, for coaching, hit the link in the description below, JanikciFitness.com. Fill out that application, get on a call with me, and let's plot out what we can do together in terms of achieving your goals. Until next time, you know how it is. Iron sharpens iron, progressive overload your life. In the meantime, keep dream chasing. Peace.